in need of care and attention. As he held the chipped and battered gun in his hands, he didn't need to look, but he could tell. When people glanced at him from the corner of their eyes, they would mutter under their breath about the way that he looked. He didn't care. He was in the middle of a battle, and the warm gun felt good. It felt right in his soft hands, and they could think and say what they liked for all he was concerned. There was too much eardrum-bursting noise, too many bright flashing lights reflected in his small grey-blue eyes, for him to be distracted by what anyone thought. Or at least that's what he told himself. He had been here before, and he would hope to be locked in the fight again. It was only the acrid stench of the toilets and the stale taste of old food in the air that made him reluctant to enter the arcade again. Before he'd come to this country, he had been an outsider, even in his own family, and sometimes he thought that maybe, just maybe, they were right about the way that he looked and dressed. His own father's dark, scathing words rattled in his head. "Just look at you! You're a full-grown man and you dress like some kind of a teenager locked in a war against vampires. When we emigrate, I hope you're going to change your ways." The memory of his father's well-rehearsed speech hurt him, and he pulled his hand through his long, black, slicked-back hair, and he was so deep in thought that he missed. As he stabbed at the pause button, he swore long and low beneath his breath, and reached inside the smooth, full-length leather coat that felt all too new on his now sweating back. He was looking for the guide to the game that he had printed out the night before. He cursed the mirrored buckles at the cuff as they scratched against the bare skin at his shoulder beneath this great shielding canopy of a coat. His map had fallen to the ground and lay like a dead bird on the sticky carpet, but he was more interested in the guide for the game. Even after 2 months, he still hadn't got used to the heat, and he knew that he would have to keep on wearing thin cotton vests until he got acclimatised to the humidity. If nothing else, they reminded him of his time at school in England. Memories of paper cuttings on his proud mother's knee passed through his thoughts, and a hint of a song found its way to his lips from the summer when everything seemed possible, when he was the sporting athletics hero of the town with the whole world in front of him. But they were quickly dispersed as he remembered his father barking at him as they boarded the plane. "You might think that you can sing, but it's different singing for a living and playing a pop star in a pub with your drunk mates. Some of us have to make a living, earn a living, make a bob or two, and we can't all live on dreams of what might have been." He could see the beaming afternoon sun fruitlessly trying to get a handhold in the fetid darkness of this cavernous arcade as he opened and lay the damp paper on the deck of the video machine. He remembered his real home, and it was nothing like this place. It was dark and cold, but there was always a chance for a walk in the park where no one would bother you. Again, he remembered happier times with picnics at the foot of trees, resting your back against trees after another county win under his belt, and the chance to rule the world. Almost by accident, he caught a glimpse of himself. He pointed the gun at his own reflection, and for a moment he felt powerful with it in his hands. "So why are you here?" Before there was a chance for these words to be soaked up in the dank, cloying atmosphere, he gave a broad smile and answered his own question. "Because you've nothing else to do." He laughed, as it was a mockery of his father's voice that spilled from his lips. Unfortunately, his solitary laughter had caught the attention of a large group of teenagers who were only a few years younger than him. He might have been older, he might have been a man, but there were too many of them for him to ignore. They noisily threw their own guns down and walked menacingly towards him like a pack, savouring a fight. The tallest of them all stood between him and his game, sat on the deck of the console, and casually crumpled up his guide. "So what you got to laugh at? What's that song you singing? You a famous singer?" He paused. "Goth boy, lost your way, a bit too far away from home." He glanced at the fallen map and laughed with a slowly dawning recognition on his face. Not an outsider!" He looked for and got nodding approval from the rest of the group as they fell upon the map and tore it to shred. "So, what's your name, goth boy?" Bob Mason had been in the situation too many times, and he knew that he could out-talk these thugs, but he knew that he couldn't be bothered to waste his energy, breath or time on this bunch of Neanderthals. As he was reaching into his pocket, as a man, they all lurched back as if he was going to pull a gun, and he took a handful of 50-cent pieces and threw them in the air. Perhaps it was the shock, but more likely the idea of getting a couple of bucks worth of games for free. It reduced this ruthless gang into a group of groping 6-year-olds fighting for a balloon as they scrabbled for the change. The confusion as they bumped and fought each other for the loose change allowed Bob to run out of the arcade and make a peaceful, if somewhat poorer, escape. He was glad that he had his new trainers on his feet as he sped away, and he laughed as he ran, almost blinded by the glaring sun, out and along the strange streets. If he had had his map with him, he would have been home in no time. If he had had any money left, he could have caught a bus, but that would have required effort and thought, and if his father had ever been right, then he was right now. Thoughtless, careless, and grand dreams of being famous. That's what they should put on your gravestone. You never think ahead, and you wait for the whole world to fall into your lap. Well, someday you're gonna come undone. He hated to admit it, but as the sound of his father's words faded in his imagination, he realised that his dad was nearly right for once. If he had been hot before, then he was sweltering now after his long run and the heat of the day, and as he neared a broad, open, litter-strewn and neglected park, he took the time to take off his coat, rest against a tree, and think about his life. He would never call himself a failure. He had too many medals from his days as a runner to think of himself as a loser. He might not be good at many things, but he would always have the memories to fall back on. Ticket stubs from concerts and athletics meets and tournaments fluttered in the early evening breeze as he contemplated and tried to make sense of the course he had chosen for himself. And it was then, as he sat there, that something caught in the cracked and drying soil by the last dying glimpses of the now setting sun sent a thin beam of light to dazzle him. This was a part of town he did not know. This was a place where he should have remembered his father's words. Thoughtless, careless, someday you'll come undone. As he reached for the shining object, half in and half out of the ground, he wondered what a knife would be doing in that place. As soon as he wrapped his fingers about it, the whole sky lit up as if lightning had become stilled in the air. Barking voices cut through the littered silence. Drop the weapon and assume the position. If he had thought, if he had applied some care to where he was and what he had done, he would have walked home, straight home, and not picked up the murder weapon that had been the focus of a police stakeout for a full 9 days. They had been waiting, watching, and had to make an arrest, or the mayor was going to have their badges. It didn't matter to them that this was a stranger, someone lost in a foreign city. His fingerprints were all over the knife, the murder weapon, and that was all that mattered. He had a scratch at his shoulder, and it fitted with the crime scene. It didn't matter to them that he'd done it by accident on the buckle of a new coat. What did matter was that they were going to make an arrest. The mayor was going to cut them some slack, and he would have thought and care to keep him company in his cell. Quite a catch. As he pushed the snow-damp newspapers through yet another door, through yet another letterbox, He realised that he had stopped even glancing at the headlines. He had no idea what was happening in the world, and he was daydreaming again. He hadn't even noticed the cold or the wet of this winter's morning, or the thin layer of snow on his short, straight hair. To be honest, he had become so used to being up at this time that he didn't react to the town hall clock striking 7:30. "Great," he muttered, as he carried his now still half full bag of papers. 25 to 8. In this small seaside town, the clock was famously 5 minutes slow. "Just another 45 fun-filled minutes, and I'll be enjoying myself in school." Now here's a strange thing. As his breath steamed up the air, as the words skipped from his lips, he didn't say these words. He sang them quietly, but confidently, so as to not wake anyone up. He sang them clear and sharp, with just a trace of a Midwestern accent on the turning of the vowels. Singing made his small, green, generous eyes light up, and helped him to pass the time as he lugged the great bag of papers from one end of town to the other. Of course, he didn't just restrict himself to singing quietly when he was working. He would benefit the world with letting rip in full-throated glory when he took part in the musicals at the Tech, when he sang in the church choir, even though he knew that God didn't believe in him. Otherwise, why wouldn't he get his audition on the TV show, Shows What You Can Do? And wild horses couldn't drag him away from the karaoke mic at every christening, marriage, funeral and engagement party in his not inconsiderably large extended family. Over the past year, his mum had allowed him to go on Saturday afternoons to busk to a backing track on the local underground as the match came out. No one in the bustling crowds paid him that much attention, but at least he was singing out loud and in front of people. At least, when he got home, he'd be able to sing to his mother, because she always encouraged him, and if the truth were to be known, he relied on her for money and advice. True, Tom did make some money with the round, but he needed more than that to go to the concerts, and she had made him pay for some of the shopping and work around the house to get enough to see his favourite bands in the nearby city. He had a broad smile on his face as he placed the last of the papers in the door and excitedly thought about tonight's concert as he ran on the fine powdery snow to his own front door. "Where have you been? It's 8 o'clock. His mother's voice was reproving and concerned at one and the same time, and he wasn't going to correct her about the accuracy of the town hall clock. "And you're going to have to race through your breakfast if you're going to make it on time for school." She placed a warmed, willow-pattern plate with 3 generous, reheated slices of margherita pizza and a side salad in front of him. He rubbed his stomach as if he were in a TV commercial. "My favourite." This was true. It was his favourite and only food that he ate for breakfast, dinner and tea. He was a fussy eater, and he would eat pizza and salad on Christmas Day if he had the chance. "So, our Tom, what you going to wear for the Matadores concert? I'll get it out and wash it and iron it for you." His mother was unnecessarily folding a tea towel as she spoke. Through cheese and tomato mouthfuls he spoke. "No, you don't do that," he was insistent. "I know what I'm wearing. The new denim jeans, the blue ripped tee and the sandals. Don't wash them, or I'll look like me mum's washed them in His voice trailed off, as he knew that she wanted to look after him, but he wasn't a baby anymore, and he wanted to look like his hero, Brandon Flores, lead singer of the Matadores. She was hurt, but only a little. It hadn't been easy for the two of them, and she had tried so hard not to mother and smother him. So she patted down the tea towel and laid it on the draining board and said in mock judgment, "You're never going to wear those old flip-flops, not in this weather." As he stuffed the last few pieces of the pizza in his mouth, he gave her a muffled "Miss Ann, and you can't stop me." As he kissed her on the cheek, patted the back of his scraggy hamster Brandon, that after 10 years just plain refused to die, and ran out of the door with his enormous bag that was only slightly smaller than his paper bag. Tom loved rock music better than pizza, and he loved the Matadores more than any other band, and all through the day he had nothing but the evening's concert in his thoughts. In his own mind, he thought that he was pretty good at football. He had never noticed that his friends had voted with their feet, as he was always second to last to be picked. But even then, he had been humming and striking poses with his wiry body on the pitch to such an extent that he was substituted after 2.5 minutes, as the town hall clock struck 2:05. As he sat on the bench, he remembered that he had helped with the local band roadieing, lifting and moving their heavy speakers and gear. He had always thought about being a guitarist like his dad, but when his fingertip got trapped under a 100-watt cabinet and had to be amputated, he knew that his playing days were over, and his only true position would have to be at the front of the band as a lead singer. As the lead singer, Brandon Flores to be exact. He had all of his moves and stances, and Tom might have been an imaginative daydreamer, but he was not mistaken about his ability to sing. It truly wasn't just for fools and family either. He had been a singer since being a child. Everyone commented about his clear, strong voice, just like Brandon. If you were to ask him what had happened between sitting on the bench and entering the domed concert hall, he might have mentioned that his mother had washed and mended his jeans and t-shirt. "I had to stitch and patch them. There were more holes than clothes." He could say that the metro was filled with people who looked like him, with torn Matadores shirts and rubberized flip-flops on their feet, and the strong, bittersweet smell of beer was on their breath, but none of that mattered to him. He was here in the concert hall and at the front, within touching distance of his hero, and pure heaven was filling his ears and senses as he drank the heady concert in. He had sung along to all of the songs at the top of his voice. He had jumped and moved in harmony with Brandon, and he had gathered some admiring glances from some of the other people in the crowd. "Hey son, you're good. You should be up there with them. Why man, you're like his double." Tom had not noticed, but Brandon was not on top form. He could have sung the instructions for a washing machine, and he still would have loved him. But an earlier bomb scare had shaken the lead singer, and he had only a loose grip on the mic. With a twirl and a leap that lacked his usual assured confidence, Brandon lost his grip and let the microphone fly through the air, and Tom, in mimicking mid-leap, reached his hand and caught it. The crowd gasped, and then stood in wonderment as this young lad from the audience took up the song without missing a beat. The band were all grinning as this perfect, in-tune and in-rhythm voice soared through the hall. Tom was not going to let go, not now, and he saw Brandon nod in his direction, and with a wave of his hand, reluctantly encourage him to finish the song. The crowd went wild. He was manhandled onto the stage by a couple of roadies, and he sang a duet with Brandon which made the roof seem as if it were in danger of being torn off with the applause. Of course, it couldn't last. Brandon had to stamp his authority on the concert, and after Tom had been returned to the audience, he sang and gyrated like he had never done before, and the concert was one of the Matadores' best. Outside the hall and on the metro, Tom was patted on the back and praised for saving the concert. People asked him to sign their t-shirts and flip-flops, and as far as this fan was concerned, that could have been it. The next morning it was all over the local papers and in the news that a local schoolboy was the singing sensation of the North. Grainy CCTV photographs of Tom singing on the stage were on the front pages of the papers that he was delivering. His mum's phone was going mental with offers of work from agents, from the TV and radio, to be in Matadores tribute bands. But they all said the same thing. that Tom would have to sign now or the chance would be gone. It was all too much. His mum would say that he needed to think carefully about it, but she would back him all the way and go with whatever decision he made. On yet another cold Monday morning, when he went back to his usual round, instead of having time to think about what he should do, there were photographers hiding in the bushes, taking his picture as he pushed newspapers through the doors. A tiring week of this hounding later, the final straw came when he received a contract that promised him the earth if he changed his name to Jeff.
"Listen, son, nobody's going to make it big in this business with a name like Tom. You want to have a handle that'll make the girls swoon. Change your name, sign here, and the world's yours."
That was it. He wanted to sing, not just to be famous and have swooning girls. He loved music. So he tore the embossed paper up and watched the agent leave their front room. When he was a full-grown man, he would look at the silver-gilded frame that held faded, yellowing pieces of paper held together with brittle, age-worn sellotape, and wonder about what might have been. Framed. As she pushed her way through the crowd at the new brown brick school's gate, she was excited to be away from home, but she knew the only thing she was really changing were the names of those who wanted to bully her. This steel and glass building might have been new, and it did have the sweet smell of carpet glue, paint and chocolate of a new school, but this whole place was squashed, crowded with people rushing like bulls in china shops to get to lessons that, quite honestly, bored her. In this school, it was better to be regarded as stupid than let anyone know that you had two brain cells to rub together. She might have been disorganised in her dress and the way she packed her school bag, but she had it all upstairs. She could have answered every question in every lesson, and she had when she first arrived, but now she knew it was best, wisest, to put her hand up only once in a while, and even better, to keep the bullies off her back by deliberately giving the wrong answer so they would leave her alone, apart from the name-calling. Better to be called thick than be beaten for having a brain. As she forced her way through the crowds of seething students, she hid her face from the early cold of this dark winter's morning with the charity shop scarf that still smelt of her mother. It was threadbare, old and worn, but it hid her downturned mouth and the finger marks, wheals and welts on her face that she had earned for answering her stepmother back. She didn't have many memories of her mother, her real mother, but she would, if she screwed her sapphire blues eyes up tight and let go of all thoughts, she would have a vague recollection of a summer's day in a sunny back garden with a smiling mother beaming with pride as she watched her daughter bounce and dance on the grass. It all seemed so far ago and long away from this unruly mob of students who were here to supposedly learn. She was upset, but not surprised, that she felt so alone and lonely in the middle of such a large crowd, and reached for the photograph that she had hidden in the depths of her coat. It was worn now, and she believed that it was a photograph of her grandfather. She could only remember it being in amongst the few things that she had that were hers. It gave her comfort to look at his benign face, smartly dressed in his soldier's uniform and smiling from behind the stained and cracked glass. It was her keepsake, her charm, and she carried it with her wherever she went. In the absence of friends, his smiling face was someone she could talk to. It was as if she had woken up to some daylight dreamtime nightmare, where she was everyone's scapegoat for their own wretched lives, and she was used as the reason for their lives being in tatters. She was used to hearing people, so-called relatives, her stepmother, saying, "If it hadn't been for you, I could have been someone. I could have had a life. Instead, I'm stuck with you. A great gangling waste of space. An ungrateful girl who's good for nothing." There was never anything after that. If she was lucky, there would be a turning of her back and a slamming of a door. But she hadn't been that lucky this morning. That was why she had to pull the scarf up just a little higher and cover her tightly curled yellow hair over a bruised and marked forehead. She knew that she was kind. She only had kind thoughts in her head, but she was so tired, tired in her body and in her mind, tired of the taunts about her scraggy clothes, a creased and torn blue and white polka dot blouse that nearly met the school's rules, and a single skirt that she had to wear every day. She knew that when she swam, she was free, but she couldn't swim today, as too many questions would be asked about the marks on her face and hands. So she would have to rush through the crowd and hide until the PE lesson was over. It was then that she noticed that the group of older girls were eyeing her up suspiciously, and it was only then that she realised that they were not looking at her clothes, but looking at her trainers. Even the teachers stayed away from them. She had heard the head calling them "nothing but trouble" as she had scurried down the broad, jammed corridors. She hadn't meant to do it. It was sort of an accident. She had been in town and had been to the noodle bar and was feeling happy for once, and she dreamt of buying anything that she wanted. She was still full, giddy, as she sat at the side of the shoe shop and tried on the quality trainers that she would never have the money for in a million lifetimes. She had only meant to try them on. She'd been entranced by their aquamarine green stripes, and without thinking, she was outside and on the bus home. She wanted to give them back, but they looked so good and felt so right that she thought she would take them to the shop and write an anonymous sorry note, but not for at least a day. With only her eyes showing between her scarf and her hair, she didn't see that this group of trouble had made a pincer movement from the sides to trap her in their midst. Before she knew it, she was surrounded and being prodded and pressed from all sides. Her bag was pulled from her back. Her grandfather's photograph had fallen from her inside pocket. As she made to grab for it, she was restrained from behind. "Who's this then? Your boyfriend? Bit old for you, isn't he?" This small girl's voice was shrill and scratched at her ears as she fruitlessly reached to retrieve her precious photograph. She spoke again. "So, where does a girl like you get the money to buy them?" She pointed at her now scuffed trainers. "Don't suppose it was stealing, was it?" The rest of the girls giggled in harmony as they enjoyed this sight before them. "You see, we were in town." They all nodded. "We were in the noodle bar." She moved closer to her and pulled the old scarf away from her face. There was a collective gasp as they saw her marked face, and anyone with a drop of sympathy in their soul would have stopped this violent charade, but it was too late now. She cleared her throat and ignored the bruising to her cheeks and carelessly let the photograph fall and smash on one corner on the hard playground concrete. "And we were very impressed with the way that you borrowed the trainers. And we were wondering," they all stepped forward and muttered amongst themselves, "we were wondering if you would like to be a part of our little group." Here the smaller girl had her face almost touching this frightened girl's. It was so close that she could smell stale cigarettes and yesterday's chewing gum on her breath. "What we need to know is if you've got the bottle to be trouble." We need you to fulfill a dare. Just a little dare." As she spoke, two of this small lead girl's friends had arranged some crates and pallets to make a ramp that pointed over the wall at the back of the school, while another had broken the restraining lock on one of the bikes from the shining steel shed beside the dinner hall. She nodded her head. "All you have to do is jump on the bike, run up that ramp, and we'll let you be. Trouble with us all. You don't want the police to be involved now, do you?" Here her voice was sweeter than syrup. It was as if she was asking her to go for an afternoon stroll, rather than risk breaking her neck for the sake of having these misfits as friends. As she could feel her arms being freed, she went and picked up the broken picture frame, shook it, and kicked the glass away. She went to go towards the bike and looked as if she were going to take this fateful leap, but as soon as she got to it, she saw them all, as a girl, scatter as the caretaker came around the corner. There was nothing for it. She pedalled and pushed her way past this bear of a man and skidded on the icy streets until she was so far from the school and her home that she felt as if she could stop. At the edge of town, by the side of the bus station, with a heart still beating from excitement and fear, she started to talk to the photograph of her grandfather. Her voice fought with the drone of the destination announcements. "At least I can count on you not to want to hurt me." As she spoke to herself, she looked at the frame and was surprised to see that at the exposed corner there appeared to be a piece of paper beneath the faded picture. With some effort to make sure that she did not tear her grandfather's image, she found a letter that had a scrawled, spidery list of family members and addresses. She sucked in the diesel-filled air in amazement when she looked at her mother's name and found that she was not an only child. If this piece of paper was to be believed, then she had a sister, an older sister, who lived not more than 10 miles away, and it would be worth running away from home on the hope that she could find someone who would treat her with more kindness than she could find in this town. Many years later, they would sit together and laugh and talk of the day a ragamuffin of a girl had landed up on a doorstep with a blurted story of being a sister, a stolen bike and a pair of trainers to her name. It all seemed so long ago since that time, but pride of place in the hall, by the doorway, was the worn picture of a smiling soldier that you could tell anything to. With a smile on her lips, hidden, unseen in the depths of the tall grass, 2 small dark eyes watched her, and a thin tongue tasted the air as she walked on the stone path by herself. Many people in the city had been wary of the way that she would smile. Stories had been passed from the time she had been at school that you could not believe a word she said, and if she looked at you in the eye, then be wary of what she said and be frightened if she smiled. The dry dust from the pampas was catching her throat, and it was as she stopped to take a drink that she could hear them all laughing in the distance. A small, cruel, lopsided grin spread across her thin lips as the faint hint of guitar music in the air by the side of the lake forced her to talk out loud. "So, that's where they are." The thought of being with him brightened up her sleepy green eyes, and she started to clumsily dance upon the spot in anticipation. She was going to surprise them all by just happening to bump into them by the side of the lake at the base of the mountains. She definitely wasn't going to tell them that she had wandered for hours looking, hunting for them. She wanted her entrance to be grand and surprising. With her delicate, dainty hands, she smoothed down her long, strawberry blonde hair and knew that she would catch them all unawares. It was strange enough that someone from Buenos Aires would have green eyes, but coupled to her fair skin and shock of blonde hair, she didn't know how he would possibly be able to resist her. This spontaneous surprise had been carefully calculated and plotted for many weeks, ever since she had seen him in his rugby kit by the side of the pool. She knew that he had noticed her. Everyone noticed her, if nothing else, for the delicacy of her body and the way that she could outswim all of the competition. She had taken the time to find out his name and where he would play, and had made it obvious that she was at the sidelines of the match. She knew that she could keep the mystery about who she was at the forefront of his thoughts if she made a quick getaway before he had the chance to talk to her. If there was one thing that you could say about Yana, it was that she loved to win, but she could not bear to lose, and, like some predator, she had him in her sights, and she was not going to lose. In all of her mystical books, she found herself immersed in the possibility of spells and potions that could magically transform her into the object of his desire, and with everything in place, she contemplated her first words like some weirding spell to the group that would captivate him. This was something that she had done 1,000 times when she was a girl, and it had always worked well. But she was a full-grown woman now, and she wondered if it would all seem too forced, too contrived. But their voices, their playing, were too close to worry about that now. Without a sound, a small, wet, dirty, round ball came crashing into her stomach as the crowd of them followed after it as they played football. All of her plans were now in tatters. She was winded, and anything that she wanted to say would have to wait. In place of words, she decided that she would dance for them all. Now I have to tell you that in her mind she was good at everything. It was true that she was good at many things, a great many things, but dancing was not one of them. The group of 3 men and 2 women stood startled, transfixed by the way that she flung her arms about like a dying tropical exotic bird with broken wings. The smooth diamond pattern of her dress that she had stolen specially for this occasion glinted in the heat of the sun, and the 2 eyes in the grass watched her closely and admired the flesh at her heel. Good, she thought. I have their attention now. The strange, arrhythmical dance continued, and he had his eyes glued to her movements. She gyrated and cavorted, and her blood boiled that all of her efforts were being met with only opened-mouthed staring as they looked beyond her. Why doesn't he sweep me up in his arms? Why doesn't he say something? Why doesn't he do something? Can he not see that I am the greatest dancer in the world? As if in answer to her pleading eyes, he spoke. Get back! This was not what she had expected him to say. She danced with more vigour and stamped her feet in the dust, and she cursed the sandals that were too big for her. She reached her arms towards him, begging him to take her in his arms. Get away! He continued, as the others grabbed hold of each other for comfort, their eyes wide with disbelief as they frantically pointed to the ground. It was in the noise of the group as they pleaded with her and her own heavy footsteps in the dust that the snake, the camouflaged, green as the grass it had hidden in, took its chance, menacingly shaking the bones at its tail, raising itself like a coiled rope to sink its fangs into the soft white flesh at her heel. It was as if an electric shock had coursed through her skin and bones and struck her like a blow across her face and turned the sun to dark as he grabbed and flung the twisted dead body of the snake onto the barbed wire fence and held her in his strong arms before her limp body hit the bare ground. As she plummeted into unconsciousness and tried to focus on his blurring face, she could hear her own voice saying, I knew that you would want me. It was the beauty of my dancing, wasn't it? And the world became dark. He had saved her life as she had courted with death. He cut at the wound with a guitar wire and sucked as much of the venom out of the blood at her heel as was humanly possible. If he hadn't been as strong as he was with his rugby training, then she might never have made it to hospital in time. Many people said that she was lucky to be alive. No one had ever survived an attack by the tropical rattlesnake this side of Belize. The skin was on show in the Argentine capital, and yet she couldn't feel glad. Huh! She had a rictus grin on her face, as a reminder of her paralysing meeting with a snake. But happy or sad, heartbroken or jealous, no one could tell how she felt, and she would always have a smile upon her lips as she clumsily danced alone by the side of a lake at the base of the Andes. Collard. As she was locked in that place between sleeping and waking and dreaming, there was something familiar about the cat that was padding about at the end of the bed and clawing and pulling at her blankets. She loved cats and could tell them apart, even at a distance, by their purring, their footsteps, the way that they would arch their backs, and the different collars at their necks. As a distant clock faintly struck midday, and with her eyes still closed shut, she smiled to herself. She thought of how she particularly liked the thin, shining metal collars that seemed too tight and looked as if they would never be released, just like the cats she had at home. It was, as she stretched in the bed and blearily took in her surroundings through her red-rimmed eyes, that she sat up bolt upright and realised that she was not at her own home or in her own bed. The startled cat scowled and hissed and scurried into a darkened corner of the over-fussy room. Her heart was beating too fast, and she felt as if she was going to pass out. She rubbed at her back, and she was still dressed in a pink silk dress, and some of last night's memories flooded into her brain. There had been a whole group of them, all of her friends. Dancing and laughter filled her thoughts, but what had happened between then and now was a mystery to her. She'd always kept her guard. She'd been friendly, but not too friendly, and had always made sure that she didn't forget to go home and sleep in her own bed. "Well, sleepyhead, it's good to know that you can wake up." The voice was soft in the air as she realised that after going out last night, she had slept over at her friend Jane Stone's house. Through her tousled, straight blonde hair, she could see that Jane was walking towards the bed and had a mug of milky tea in her hand. "Just the way you like it. More milk than tea. And if you don't mind me saying so, you looked as if you needed the rest, so I didn't want to disturb you in any way. It's a bit of a coup for me, as you've never stayed over in anyone's house in all of the time that we've known you." As she sat on the edge of the bed, she pushed the tea onto the crowded bedside cabinet beside Ellen Gatto and smiled. It was true that she had always kept her guard and had, no matter what had happened, always slept in her own bed and had her cats fed before the sun would rise. "My job? What am I going to do? I've slept in, and I'll be late and—" Jane spoke again. "Look, E, don't look so worried. I don't know why you're in such a state. You're always telling us how you hate your job and how you don't want to go back home to that great haunted house that you call home. Well, you don't have to. For now. Relax. I'll drive you over later, and we'll have a laugh over the job section in the paper. You'll have no trouble getting a job. Just enjoy the fact that you're free for the moment. For once." Jane had stopped her from pulling the covers off the bed and trying to get up, and with a reluctant, half-formed smile, Ellen allowed her to keep her in the bed. "Anyway, I don't know what all the fuss is about. You don't get paid enough for what you do for them. You're worth 10 times the salary that they pay you." And they both laughed. Ellen was an asset at any party and was always surrounded by friends and cats. As they talked and laughed together, it seemed that last night had developed back to the house, and they'd all played cards and talked, and She had fallen asleep in the corner, and no one had the heart to wake her. Jay told her that no one was as good at dealing cards as she was. Everyone had watched her as she'd curled up on the bed, and here Jane laughed. She said that she had purred as she fell asleep. And anyway, Jane held the laughter in her throat as she spoke. You're forever telling us how you hate your house, and we all thought that a change would do you good. There was laughter in the air, but the smile on Ellen Gatto's small, smudged cherry lips was thin and forced. With new, rounded, fluffy cartoon figure slippers on their feet, they picked at soft white bread and spreadable salty cheese sandwiches, tidied up and joked until it was mid-afternoon and it was time to go back to her house. They made sure that they picked up armfuls of inky newspapers as Jay took the upper highway to the hills that led to Ellen's house. The sun was still shining, and as they rolled down the drive, the old house just looked old and not a bit haunted, like the way Jane had heard from the stories from the other kids who said that they had been there. This is a beautiful house. There was wonder in her voice as Jane shut the car door. I would love to live here. The views, the rooms, just the whole place. It's beautiful. Ellen turned and looked at her friend full in the eyes. Do you really think so? Too many cats were now at her feet and rubbing themselves against her legs. Tell me again. Do you think you could live here? There was a deep, menacing, unnerving tone to her voice. Jane was slightly wrong-footed as she hastily replied to make sure she did not offend her friend. Of course! How could I not want to be here? It's such a huge house, she was stammering. It is beautiful. She had gained some of her old confidence, and you, Ellen Gatto, you've been very bad keeping this great house to yourself all of this time. You should have all of us here for a while, and we can party, and you wouldn't have to worry about having to get home. You could have a sleepover. We could have a sleepover, just the 8 of us. Ellen raised her hand, and there was a glimmer of a smile on her face and in her red-rimmed eyes. I know maybe someday soon I'll have you all over. There was a pause that was only filled by the rustle of the trees and the mewling of the cats, pleading desperately to be fed. Arm in arm they walked up to the door, and Ellen entered first, but before Jay could go through the doorway, she blocked the way for her friend. She spoke. Tell me again how you would love to live here. She was smiling and could see the newborn sunset behind her. Jane felt shaken. She just wanted to go in and sit down after the long drive. I said it before. Her words were terse and irritated. Ellen purred. Please just say the words. I'm superstitious about these things, and I like to know that my visitors love the house as much as me. She put on a small child's look on her face. Go on. Just for me. Say the words. Jane couldn't stop herself from laughing as she blurted the words and shrugged her shoulders. Look, I love the house, and I would love to live here forever. Happy now? There was no doubt about the way that Ellen smiled and let her friend pass into the hallway of the great house. Despite what was left of the sun outside, there was so little light that Jane had trouble seeing where she should go, but she was led past the stairs to the back of the house, where there was a small wood-panelled galley kitchen. If she had taken the time to acclimatise her eyes to the dark and not been rushed to the kitchen, she would have seen things that would have cut through to her soul. As it was, she could make out collections of babies' toys and rattles, knotted seaweed green ropes that hung from the ceiling, bottles that belonged in an apothecary's shop, and more cats watching her with their curious, resigned, slitted eyes. In her mind, she put it down to her friend being superstitious and more than a little eccentric that she kept all of these macabre things. As Ellen reached into an open cupboard, she pulled out a tin of cat food and looked at her friend again. "Hungry?" They both laughed, and Jay joked. "As it happens, I am. But you'll never get me eating that." Always looking into her friend's eyes, Ellen elaborately pulled at the tin with a strange, thin, silvery knife. It was as if she was peeling a fruit rather than opening a tin, and displayed the metal ribbon, and theatrically put some of the slimy, jellied meat into a dish. Without taking a breath, she thrust her own face into the midst of it, and savoured the way that it ran over her lips, teeth, and tongue. Jane's eyes opened wide with disbelief and revulsion, and she fell to the floor, retching at this disgusting spectacle. As she was there upon all fours, Ellen jumped upon her back and took the razor-sharp metal and wrapped it about her friend's neck. It slipped and slithered and fused itself into a binding collar, as Jane's skin became covered in fur, her body shrinking, and her fingernails becoming like claws. Wiping the last of the juice from her mouth, and with a triumphant glint in her now narrow eyes, Ellen Gatto picked up the screaming cat that had once been her friend. "Oh, now, my puss, you'll get your wish. You can live here as long as you like, and soon, when you're hungry, you'll get to love the food that I give you."